Well, the British government is also coming under pressure from the human rights groups to closely examine the actions of its own intelligence services in the war on terror. In London this weekend, a rally was held to demand an end to the abuses at Guantanamo. Eyewitness Alex Crutcher was there.
Guantanamo has been open for 10 years now. It has lost its momentum in the public eye. People don't care. For instance, a lot of Americans actually think it's closed because Obama promised to close it as soon as he took office. And when he didn't make that deadline, he kind of just tiptoed over that fact rather than raising awareness like he did when he said he'd close it. And people honestly believe that it's serving a purpose without knowing the facts behind Guantanamo Bay.
I think that people should be campaigning for people who live near them, who have been imprisoned in Guantanamo Bay. I think that they should pressure their government actually into taking strong action, actually to come out against as even stronger than they have done, because it's not been good enough so far. And I think they've been extremely weak, and they are kowtowing to what the American government are saying.
There's two British residents, one Shakarama, who the British government asked for his return almost 4 years ago, in fact over 4 years ago now, who's been in Guantanamo Bay for the last 10 years. He's never been charged, he's never been tried. He's got a British wife and 4 children, including one who he's never met, who live in South London. So yes, there's a definite relationship there. We're also asking for the British government to ask for a man called Ahmed Belbasha, who lived in Bournemouth for about 18 months, to return to this country. The government haven't asked for him to return, but he did live here, and there's a relationship there. So again, he should be returned to his country. We have a special relationship with the United States. The UK and the United States are very close, and we should be doing whatever we can to help our close ally close down Guantanamo Bay.
The next time you pass by a library or a bookstore, take one of Tony Blair's memoirs and stick it in the crime section. We won't stand for bombs while they're cutting our funding. A bomber plane is theft, not a hospital wing. Let's replace apathy with civil disobedience, solidarity with the protesters outside Parliament Square.
We have to just keep putting it out there, keep making it relevant. It is relevant. It's relevant to us. It's relevant to the policy of Western governments in the Middle East. And it's becoming increasingly more relevant as we potentially go into more destructive wars. Not only the globalisation of our arms industry and the globalisation of our wars, but also the globalisation of horrific injustices, which are part of the American justice system.
There's campaigns all across the world. There's protests going on different parts of the world today, for the coming week in the United States, in Canada, UK, other parts of Europe, Middle East. And so wherever you are, either organise something yourself or get people to join in. Join campaigns like us. So if you're in London, join up at the London Guantanamo campaign. Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, Reprieve. There's major international NGOs who are working on the issue as well. So yes, there's something you can do, and please do it.
Well, let me bring the discussion back to the Reverend Richard Killmer, joining us from the States. Richard, you heard Dan say there just before the break that he thought that the problems that are emerging for the Americans in the control over Bagram Air Base may see additional prisoners being added to Guantanamo in a reversal of what's been happening since Obama came to power. Do you think that's possible in terms of public opinion in the States around this issue?
Well, public opinion is, of course, divided, as you know, not only on Guantanamo, but even on the issue of torture itself. And the National Religious Campaign Against Torture, which I direct, is particularly concerned about ending torture, U.S.-sponsored torture, forever. I mean, that's why we exist. And we are concerned about Guantanamo because we believe it has been an incredibly powerful symbol around the world and in our country that has generated more terrorist acts. There's an Air Force interrogator, Matthew Alexander, who talks about the experience that he had being an interrogator, and he said that in Iraq, the number of prisoners that he was interrogating would increase every day from people who were so angry and responded so violently to U.S.-sponsored torture. So that's our major concern, and we think that Guantanamo has to be closed in order to be able to make sure that my grandchildren don't grow up in a country that engages in torture. And that's our major concern.
What's your understanding about torture in Guantanamo now? Has the public focus on it made it impossible to continue with that, or is it still taking place?
Yeah. At the same time that President Obama, in January 22nd of 2009, made a promise that he would close Guantanamo in a year, which, as we all know, has not happened. At the same time he did that, he issued an executive order that halted torture. It closed the black sites, and it assured access of all detainees to the International Committee of the Red Cross, and a number of things that would prevent torture. From everything that we can tell, and we've had people in Afghanistan and elsewhere and in Guantanamo check this out. The torture practices and policies of the United States have halted. What still worries us is that we don't have the policies in place to make sure that it will never happen again. Because what President Obama did was to issue an executive order. But that's not law. Once President Obama leaves, then the executive order could be changed by another president. So we are working hard to make sure that all of the elements of the executive order are codified so that it's actually U.S. law, and that it will therefore prevent the use of torture by the United States around the world. And that's extremely important to us. The other thing that's very important to us is we think there's a need for a commission of inquiry to look at the torture practices and policies of the United States. I mean, how did our country, that most of us love greatly, could engage in such a horrific act? I mean, how is that in fact possible? And we need to understand that. And then we need to figure out what kind of safeguards as a country we can have to make sure that my grandchildren don't grow up in a country that engages in torture.
Dan, do you think there's going to be some final kind of legal holding to account of the people who operated Guantanamo?
Well, I hope there will be eventually, but there doesn't seem to be any particular movement from the Obama administration to hold to account those who have clearly been responsible for this regime of torture and abuse and arbitrary detention over the past 10 years. So I'm not sure where that pressure is going to come from. I mean, there have been a few cases that have been brought in other countries, in Spain, for example, in relation to abuses committed by the Bush administration. But there doesn't seem, as I say, there doesn't seem to be any political enthusiasm within the US at the moment, as far as I can tell, for holding to account those who have been responsible. And Obama himself now seems to be shifting from a policy of indefinite detention and interrogations to simply launching drone attacks against suspected terrorists or insurgents and assassinating them without any due process. So I'm sure that despite his legal background, he ought to know better, but he probably would not want to be held to account for the war crimes that he is in fact committing at the moment. So it would probably seem rather hypocritical if he were to be calling for or taking measures to hold to account those who have committed war crimes within the last 10 years.
Well, I'll just ask Richard about the protest, because I know you've got some events coming up which are designed to build some pressure on the Obama administration over these matters, haven't you?
Yeah, for sure. But before I say that, let me just say a word about the investigation and holding those who ordered and carried out the torture to account, which our organization really supports and thinks is going to be very important if we, in fact, are going to make sure that U.S.-sponsored torture doesn't happen again. And that is, there's been a fair amount of pressure here in Washington and around the country to say we need a commission of inquiry, and we also need a criminal investigation to see if, in fact, laws were broken. Those are two different processes, and we think both are extremely important. What President Obama said, and he said it in 2009, was we need to look forward, not backward. And many of us in the human rights community are saying that's just absolutely wrong. I mean, there's no way that we can deal with the brokenness that's been caused by torture in this country without, in fact, looking at what happened, figure out what that is, and to make sure it never happens again. And as we look at our own personal lives, we all make mistakes, and as we try to figure out how do we fix mistakes so we don't do them again, you can't deal with it. You can't learn from it unless you go back and figure out what you did and then make sure that you never do it again. But to get to your question about efforts to continue to work hard to urge a commission of inquiry, to urge the closing of Guantanamo forever, there is a lot of activity that's going on across the country now. On January 11th, which was, of course, the first day of the opening of Guantanamo 10 years ago. We've had to deal with this, unfortunately, a sad part of our history for 10 years. Here in Washington, there will be a major event in front of the White House, starting in the White House, and then it moves to a number of other locations in Washington, D.C., starting at 12 noon Eastern Time here in Washington. And we expect, thousands of people to be here to give a very clear message that that Guantanamo has to close, that we need to put this dreadful, dark chapter behind us and learn from it and make sure that we never engage in it again. And there'll be a number of people speaking at a number of different locations. The National Religious Campaign Against Torture is having an interfaith worship service at 3 o'clock on Wednesday to bring the impact of the religious community onto this issue. This has been extremely important to the religious community, which is why the National Religious Campaign Against Torture was organized in the first place.
Well, Richard, I'm going to have to bring you to a close there, but my thanks to you and to Dan Veisnik here in London for joining us on the programme today. Wherever you are, look out for anti-Guantanamo rallies taking place near you this week. We'll be posting details of the events on our Twitter page. You can find us at Eyewitness Comment. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.